This week, two topics that demand our attention. One that many consider to be of historical significance, and the other has to do with our health and how we pay for it. It's been 2 years since the beginning of the Affordable Care Act, and this is the open enrollment time of year, and many people may soon find they'll be paying higher premiums next year. So has Obamacare helped with health care? But first, activism at Mizzou. Protests certainly seem to get results. They definitely got reaction. While that story continues to develop, we'll try to step back and see it in the larger story. So stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. 15 to the roll. 45. So joining us to help us see that larger story of what's been going on at Mizzou, I know you've been thinking about this. This is Stefan Bradley, Director of African American Studies, St. Louis University. So, okay, so let's put it in this context, and I'll ask you a couple of questions based on a couple of things I heard and saw. When I was in Columbia for KSDK, I was there for a couple of days. Our crews have been there for a few days, and maybe that's the first thing that we could start with. We were there for just a few days. This week we arrived perhaps, and as did just about every out-of-town outlet, on about day 5 or 6 or maybe even 7 or 8 of this hunger strike that had started with one of the graduate students. But then the football team got involved. Have you ever seen anything quite like that?
Oh, in history, this has happened before. That, you know, in the 60s, there was a time when college athletes would actually protest and demonstrate on behalf of civil rights issues and that sort of thing. So it's not uncommon when you think about some of the professional athletics. Bill Russell, you think about Jim Brown, you think about Jackie Robinson and Muhammad Ali and all these kinds of people, Bobby Mitchell. These kinds of people had made these kinds of demonstrations before in one way or another. And
but so, all of those are none of those are contemporary examples. Has something reawakened, or is something changed, or what happened in that time period in between there? I'm curious, do you draw a link to the college activism we saw are still seeing at the University of Missouri and college activism of the 1960s?
Well, there is, of course, I think, a link, maybe not a causal link, but there's a historical background for it. I think what we're seeing right now is just part of the zeitgeist of the moment. I think the Ferguson effect in this particular region, the idea that you would have these demonstrations out here in the St. Louis area. You'd have the occupation of St. Louis University nearby here, and then what you saw at Mizzou is part of maybe what's going on with the larger Black Lives Matter movement, and so it's not unthinkable that something like this is happening at college campuses, and so it's just a moment of protest at this particular time.
Certainly the people involved have said that it played a factor.
Oh, yeah.
In fact, some of them were in Ferguson.
Yeah.
Something else I heard there is speaking again of maybe the relationship between those of us over 30 that can't be trusted and the activist. One of the, I think it was an education professor who we did an interview with on the campus, who said these students are to be supported of something of that nature. She said that we don't need to fear them. Did we fear activists in the 60s? Do we fear them now? Why is there a difference, or what's going on here that she would even feel like she needed to say that?
Well, I think part of what happened in the 1960s is many of the activists caught adults and authority figures off guard. They didn't think that young people would act out in these kinds of ways, and so that can be frightening when you're used to telling young people to do something and they do it. I think the same thing is happening today. So many of us had written off young people in the younger generation as narcissistic individual creatures,
which they might still be,
and they may still. Who knows? Along with the rest of us, but
right.
But these young people are thinking in terms of a collective identity, and so the idea that young people concerned students 1950 would take up this protest, and then Jonathan Butler, the graduate student, would make this hunger strike, and then the football players, the African-American football players and the others would jump on with this. That's collective identity stuff, and in some ways that's inspiring and nothing to fear, but more in the way of something to guide and instruct, and I think the education professor was right, and encourage.
Of course, not everyone felt that way. We've seen a really nasty reaction online. We've had people arrested for some of the things they've said. Did that surprise you?
Not at all, not at all. When you read the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, when you read most any major news media
comment section, I think is where you're going with that.
Yeah, it's easy to tell what's going to happen, and so this social media cuts both ways. It's been able to help organize a lot of these young people who are activists, but it's also brought out some of the worst in people who are oppositional to the activists.
So what do you make of what was accomplished, or in some people's mind, not everyone would see it as an accomplishment, but it seems significant when you have a president stepping down and a chancellor demoted? It certainly seems like from the outside looking in. Are these significant developments?
Yeah, definitely. When you think that young people who aren't 30 years old yet can get people to step down and resign in this way, that's not an insignificant thing. But I'll say this: that might have been the smaller part of their campaign. That might have been the smaller part. The larger part are the other demands that they had in terms of recruitment and retention of students, black students and faculty members, getting a counselor, getting these diversity ideas into the curriculum that all students have to take. Those are, that's a tougher road to hoe, and so I think that no, it's not small that they got the president and the chancellor to step down, but the hard work is ahead of them.
Well, and speaking of that, and going back to things we heard while we were there, I mean, some of these demands were carryovers from decades ago, from the 1960s, and they were almost cut and paste into the current demands. Mm-hmm. Is there a what does that tell you?
Well, that tells you that maybe the activists of the 1960s weren't just young thugs and that sort of thing. Maybe they had their fingers on the pulse of progress, and so the fact that here we are, 50 years later almost, having to deal with the same kinds of things and the same kind of feelings of African American students at Mizzou, it's things come in a circle. I think nothing shows that more than the appointment of Mike Middleton to interim president, who was one of the founding members of the Legion of Black Collegians, and so this is how things come in a full circle.
Of course, some people had the reaction that they were concerned that this would set a bad precedent, that you could go on a hunger strike and remove the president of a four-campus system. What do you make of that reaction?
Well, I think another bad precedent is ignoring issues when they come to the fore, and so that's an important thing. I think the president had an obligation to react and pay attention to what's happening on his campus, and so I'm not sure that I would put that on Jonathan Butler, who was raising awareness about an issue, and he felt unsafe on a campus, and at a university campus, the one thing that should be guaranteed is safety. Now, comfort, I don't think that comfort should be guaranteed at all. You go to the university campus to be uncomfortable, and so I think that I wouldn't put that on Jonathan Butler. Yeah.
Stefan, thank you so much. Stefan Bradley, Director of African American Studies at St. Louis University. We appreciate it. This is a story I think we'll be following, would you agree, for some time, and perhaps other implications.
Yeah, well, you'll see it happening around the nation, I'm sure.
Very good. Stefan, thank you so much.